morning, Gerald from Los Angeles. We met at How We Will 3 years ago.
Oh, yeah, great.
Right, when Orlando was there.
Right.
Yeah.
Good morning, John.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
Wonderful.
Nós temos tradução simultânea em português, espanhol e inglês, e vocês podem acionar a tradução neste símbolo do globinho que está aqui na tela, e nós vamos pedir que vocês escrevam no bate-papo, no chat, que cidade vocês falam e qual língua vocês querem conversar. E vamos pedir também que vocês coloquem na esquerda do nome, à frente do nome à esquerda, o símbolo de PT para português, ES para espanhol, EN para inglês. Assim, na parte de diálogos, vocês vão ser organizados em salas que falem a sua língua. Okay. Good morning, Otto. Welcome to this presentation. It's a pleasure to see you here again.
Great to see you, Wilson. Very happy to join the conversation for a little while.
Yeah. We have here Gerald Häfner, is the old friend of you.
Hi, Gerald. Great to reconnect this way.
Hi, guys. Otto. Good to see you. Today I will listen to you.
Ok. Podemos começar?
Sim. Mais uma vez, bom dia, queridos amigos e prezados ouvintes. Com muito prazer recebo vocês para o 4º dia de encontros do Seminário Democracia e Autonomia, um evento de uma parceria do professor Wilson Nobre com o grupo Jornada da Trimembração. Esse grupo é integrante da Seção de Ciências Sociais no Brasil. A Seção de Ciências Sociais no Brasil promove a conscientização no âmbito do social humano, por meio da pesquisa, da educação e da publicação. Ontem, na presença de João Mellet, percebemos a importância de reconhecimento da dimensão espiritual do ser humano. O ser humano, na sua condição social de cooperação, deve priorizar a harmonia entre as esferas do espiritual, da vida do direito e da vida econômica. Quanto à democracia, o voto diário é a conscientização no consumo de mercadorias, em especial na escolha e na decisão da compra de produtos que agregam qualidade ao meio ambiente e propiciam a humanização do indivíduo. Trata-se do consumo responsável, ou seja, comprar com consciência é praticar a democracia. O preço mais barato inibe a democracia no organismo social. Hoje, nós temos a honra de receber no palco virtual do Seminário Democracia e Autonomia. O parceiro dessa empreitada, Otto Scharmer. Otto Scharmer estudou economia na Universidade de Wittenberg, em Herdecke. Ele é cofundador do Presenzing Institute, um dos fundadores da teoria U, hoje disponível em 15 idiomas. Otto Scharmer atua na Europa, Américas, Ásia e África. Ele é professor do MIT, autor de mais de 25 livros. Permitam-me mencionar duas frases de Otto Scharmer que caracterizam a atitude de suas ações no mundo. A primeira, a única mudança que faz a diferença é a transformação do coração humano. A segunda, nós não conseguimos compreender um sistema a não ser transformando-o. Agora eu tenho o prazer e a honra de receber, na sequência de nossas atividades no Seminário Democracia e Autonomia, para que ele possa dar forma e conteúdo ao contexto do nosso encontro no final desta manhã da quinta-feira, com a palestra intitulada Democracia e Educação. Muito bem-vindo, Otto Scharmer. A palavra no palco virtual é sua.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the kind introduction. I don't know that I maybe misheard that, or it was a translation issue. But the one thing from the introduction, I'm not the author of 25 books. Maybe I'm not sure. I would have liked it's just a few of them. And the reason why it's not 25, it's I'm way too busy with, as an action researcher, to be involved in real projects on the ground, like the rest of us here, I think, in this community. So what I try to do is to be a part of a larger global movement that we see arising at this point, and to do my part in co-evolving that. So I was born and raised on a farm in northern Germany, and my parents, in fact, turned that farm from some 60 plus years ago, 60 or almost 65 years ago, from running it in a conventional way to biodynamic. And so that was the first thing that that really influenced me, because I could see in a nutshell, right, on the farm, that a place like a living farm is it is really a community that has ecological aspects, that has social economic aspects, but also a spiritual dimension. So I could see that and live within that context early on. I went to a Waldorf school in Hamburg, and so that's something that also influenced me, because kind of it allowed me to maybe I'm not just trying to fix something in the video here. So the Waldorf school was influential for me as well, because it allowed me to connect many subjects that we were dealing with, not just from what is or is not, or like a mere facts, but more from a living systems perspective, from a perspective where something is always developing, it's alive, and so where does it wants to go, and how is what we see kind of part of a larger creative process, and what is our role in that? So that's certainly something that also influenced my upbringing. And the third aspect, and that kind of connects me with Gerald also, is really that I felt back then it was kind of really the birth of the green movement. And so the anti-nuke movement, there was one of the major battlefields of the anti-nuke movement in the 1970s was not too far from the farm. So it was quite natural being part of that. And it felt like just about everyone in my generation kind of was either part of the green movement or the peace movement a few years later. And when you're part of a social movement, and it's of course these movements have different names and different contexts. When you're part of a social movement, you what really connects you is that the other people you feel are inspired by, they feel the same about the future, right? They're inspired about the future that you all know could be quite different from what we see right now, what we see going on around us. And this kind of felt sense, it's not just something I kind of individually in my isolation project into the future, but there's a real future possibility out there that we all are connected with in different ways. Kind of this experience of a social field, right, that is connected with the deeper levels of our own humanity, and where we are also connected with each other. That had quite a formative experience on me. And so what I tried then later to develop as a theory, because when I then went into the organizational learning world, I realized that a lot of the learning methodologies are really learning from the experiences of the past, right? But when you deal with disruption, we really need to learn as how to learn from the emerging future, how to connect with the emerging future. And for that, you need to activate a knowing that's not just above the neck, but that is below the neck. And how do we access these deeper capacities that we all have, but that education and socialization is basically running out of us usually, right? So that's that really became an organizing question to me. And so presencing and theory U is nothing else rather than beginning to make these to increase the question how, particularly in the moment when we meet disruption, how we can access the deeper levels of our own awareness and of our own knowing in a more reliable way. Because we all do it in our good moments anyhow, but the professional question is when it's really when push comes to shove, kind of when you're really in a very difficult situation, can you do it, right? Can you do it in high stakes situation, professionally and personally? And so that really brought me here to MIT, because at MIT there's this back then there was this kind of learning center founded by Peter Senge that I found so interesting, because they explored exactly these questions through practical experiments. So let me maybe share just a few images for my remarks, and then we can move into the conversation. So basically, what you see here is our current moment, right? So we we face a moment of disruption. We are on one side of the disruption, current reality. The other side of the abyss here, emerging future, we know already less about that, but what we know least about is the journey from here to there. And that's really where I think all of us in this conversation here, but also really all of us connecting with the theory U approach, or presencing approach, we take a perspective on that question that says, yes, it takes a journey, but that journey is not just an outer journey, going to the edges of the system and so forth, but also an inner journey, kind of connecting to our deeper sources of knowing. And so the methodological foundation for where I and my colleagues are working from today is something that we call awareness-based systems change, right? You have seen systems change and systems models many times, right? So it's like the iceberg model, for example, symptoms at the top, then you have different layers of reality beneath. And so this structures, paradigms of thought, and deeper sources. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the evolution of systems thinking over the past, I would say, 50 plus years. And when you think about systems thinking about all four of these layers, that's what I would call awareness-based systems change. And that can be summarized with four simple lines and principles. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. Famously, Kurt Lewin, the founder of action research, claimed that, and that's really
Otto, your sound is off. Your microphone is off. Yeah.
so.
Okay.
How long was it off?
It's 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, so awareness-based systems change, right? Approach to systems change, all four of these levels can be summarized in these four principles. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. Kurt Lewin, the founder of action research. Secondly, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So that's the one-line summary of my past 20 years of participating in a variety of projects. So it's more than 20 years in less than 10 words. And it basically is something that you have probably seen many times, right? If you just change outer structures and processes, but not the thinking and the way people converse with each other, then the same people in a new structure create the same problems. So we really need to get to this level 3 here, or like paradigms of thought. And then you can't transform. So if we enter level 4, so you cannot change the system unless you transform consciousness, means you need to involve all four of these layers here. And then you can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. So that's really something that we are already familiar with in, let's say, face-and-face relationships. If you go through a period of profound change, what do? I mean, you get yourself a coach, a therapist, or a good friend, right, who can listen to you. So because no one can do this alone, someone who can listen to you and maybe mirror back one or two things, right, one or two observations. And that's exactly this kind of looking into the mirror. What we lack in larger systems in society today is we lack the mechanisms for that. We don't have that. So even though that's kind of the necessary foundation, and that of course is something systems thinking always said, but the new word here is the second last, sense. Because traditionally, from a systems thinking point of view, we would have said you cannot change a system unless you make the system see itself, okay? But if I just see the broken system, right, so I have a map and so on, and I know everything that's broken, the knowledge stays here, right? And what we see in the world today is the knowing-doing gap, right? We know everything that needs to be fixed, right? It's not, is it happening? No. So we have a disconnect between head and hand on the level of the collective. And of course, the only way of addressing that is activating the knowing of the heart. So that's why the sensing part is so critical. And that gets us to really the social arts, and that gets us to methodologies Because if I'm not feeling the pain of the other, it's very unlikely kind of that we can unlock the sources of collective creativity. And then you can't lead systems change unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. So that basically says this: the way the future shows up is in our heart first and later in our heads. So as a change maker or as a leader, can you feel the future? And where do you? So that's really, because the future is not something out there abstract, right? The future is very personal, right? Where do you connect with a future possibility that depends on you in order to come into reality? So that's kind of the operative question here. So that's, if you want, the methodological background. And a lot of what we learned on, okay, how do we do this? I learned from listening to practitioners, right? To listening to people who actually created something profound innovation in their own context, be that business, society, or science, or the arts. And one of them, the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, so he summarized his own journey as a leader and change maker with this line: the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So it depends on the inner place. The success of what we do as change makers depends on the inner place that we operate from. And that, of course, the inner place today I would describe with open mind, open heart, open will, right? Curiosity, compassion, courage, by which I mean capacities that allow us to move beyond downloading. And, you know, I think I don't need to go through the details here because A, you already know that, and B, we don't have the time. So, but the main thing really about open mind is this here: suspension, suspending the old habits of judgment. The main thing about the open heart is this: empathizing, seeing a problem that you face through, not through your own angle, but through the eyes of your stakeholders, right? And open will really is this here, right? Letting go, letting come. Letting go of the old in order to create space for something new to emerge. Now, okay, that's what we do. I mean, that's what you do, I'm sure, kind of what we are trying to do, let's put it that way. But let's be real. What's really happening around us? I mean, I don't need to tell you in Brazil, as an American here, of course, we see the exact opposite, right? The precise opposite. So it's the freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, rather than the opening, right? That's playing out around us. That's kind of the real story we are part of. The amplification of ignorance, bias, hate, cynicism, fear, and fanaticism. Now, again, I could go, right? Denial, desensing, absensing, right? It's the opposite of seeing, sensing, and then connecting, right? So we are holding on to the past, right, rather than letting go and so on. And rather than, you know, birthing something new into reality here, we move into a pattern of blaming, destruction, and eventually self-destruction, right? Self-destruction on the level of others, on the level of our institutional foundations, on the level of trust, on the level of nature, and so on and so forth. So I don't need to tell you, that's what we see as a huge amplification here. We see a lot of examples also here. But the interesting thing is we have a huge amplification mechanism here, mainly driven, in my view, I mean, that's a longer discussion, obviously, by two factors: dark money and big tech, right? Surveillance capitalism. If you read Shoshana Zuboff's book, it's a very good analysis of, you know, how, you know, big data companies are really driven by epistemological inequality, right? One side knows, it's like a one-way mirror. One side knows everything about the other side. And the way that's used is, as we all now learn through Facebook, right, is really, it's undermining democracy, making people, creating massive phenomenon of mental health issues, particularly among young people, and leading to massive polarization, right? So all these, problematic behaviors here are massively amplified. Now, we have a lot of seeds here, but what we don't have is a amplification mechanism, right? So that's something I think as a movement we need to address, because it's not good enough.
IRTH.
Excuse me. Otto, the slides are not going. Stop it in the first one.
Okay. Let me do that again. How is that?
It's okay. It's absence and presencing.
Yeah. So that was what I was talking about, right? So I don't know where, where I lost it. So I started here, we talked about that. And then I talked about, hey, what we see is the exact opposite. Is that visible, Wilson?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. So basically, as human beings, as societies, we live right in between, right? So we live in a world where we are between these two social fields, and we have agency whether when disruption happens, we respond one way, which is basically turning away and closing, right, our mind, heart, and will, by which we activate one cycle, the cycle of self-destruction, with all these activities that we all know too well right now, and particularly among Brazilians and Americans, we don't need to lecture each other on these things, or whether we turn toward, right, towards what's coming at us from the future, from the disruption. And by opening our mind, heart, and will, which is activating a different cycle, the cycle of co-creation, that we also are very familiar with. So that's basically the world we live in. So I would say, as change makers, as people who try to make a positive difference, that I assume we all are kind of coming together in this moment, or we all try to be, let's put it that way. We, I believe, face a situation where it's not just good enough to just launch another good project or something. We need to find a way as a movement to deal with these forces of absencing. We need to engage them, because that's where a lot of energy is today in our environment. And so when you then double click on that and say, hey, what is that really, kind of the freezing of the mind, heart, will that we collectively enact? Where does that really come from? And I think eventually it is coming from a separation between self and world, self and other, and between self and self. And when I say self and self, I mean my current self and my highest possible future self, right? My small s self, my capital S self. And so what we need to learn to do is to create holding spaces, I believe, right? So how can we transform and regenerate? And I think to go to the roots, right, we need to collapse this wall here that we see here on the left-hand side. And so that has to do with holding spaces that allow for opening the mind, so to access our unconditional witnessing, right? Seeing together, that allows for accessing our unconditional compassion and love, really creating holding spaces where we hold each other kind of in this moment. And that often happens in very small groups, that some of which you maybe are already part of. And then creating holding spaces that allows us to access our unconditional confidence, because often people feel the civilization is heading in the wrong direction. We are hitting the wall. I want to be part of a different story, but I don't know how. And I'm not even sure whether we can do it, because there's also like a culture of doubt and depression in the air, right? That we are dealing with. I know we needed to do something different, but can we really? So I think this kind of accessing our unconditional confidence is a very important ingredient that we need to cultivate in order to move towards this creating together. So if you step back a little bit and look at the bigger picture, so what do we see in society right now? Post-truth, right? Disinformation and doubt all over, right? The future of democracy all over. It's in crisis, right? It's not working what we are having right now in many situations, because as example Facebook, right? What is Facebook really? It's built on a business model that's thriving on architectures of separation, right? You get user engagement by activating anger, hate, and fear. That's the most effective strategy. And that's what's being amplified. And then, of course, the future of humanity, right? So are we all just turning into machines? Are we kind of creating environments that allow us to activate and cultivate the deeper levels of our humanity? So from a leadership point of view, I would say, from a change maker point of view, what is it? What are the deeper capacities we need to cultivate? And the first one has to do with really deepening our scientific activity, by which I mean, let the data talk to you, right? All science is about let the data talk to you. It's not kind of about you projecting stuff out. And from an individual leadership point of view, can you listen with humility, right? How good are you listening to stuff that you don't want to hear? Can you lean into that, or are you turning away? Because at the root of absencing is the turning away. It's not the leaning in. Question one, right? That second one kind of is, how do you overcome architectures of separation? Well, by deepening, how do we deepen democracy, right? By creating architectures of connection, right? That is often on a local level. Has everything to do with your conference, which is kind of the regeneration and the evolution of democracy, really. And I think this is a critical question here. Can you sense the system from the edges? What I mean from the edges, so when you ask yourself, okay, when we talk about the evolution of our system, who is not at the table? Who are the most important voices not listened to in the current institutional arrangements that we have? And how do we bring these most marginalized voices in to the conversation and into the spaces of listening in an appropriate way? And then the last one is really about, future of humanity is really how do we deepen, our co-creativity by strengthening our by ability to activate our action confidence. So the question is really the one I already asked before, which is where do you sense the future, right? Do you, right? And where's that, right? And how can you? What is if you follow that sensing, right? Where's that leading to? So really, kind of to cultivate the capacity to connect with the field of future possibilities in a very personal way that can be very strengthening. That is really at the source of activating action confidence. What I mean with action confidence is not to do something well, right? That's performance confidence, right? So action confidence is the capacity to step into unknown territory, to step into a future that is uncharted, that only comes into being by me having the courage to step into the territory of the unknown. So in summary, planetary healing and civilizational regeneration, basically that's what we are doing, right? So it's a massive movement that's beginning in many places right now, regenerating planet, society, and self, right? And democracy is right at the middle of that. So the only way of doing that is by doing this, I believe, right? Activating generative social fields. Most social fields today, I showed you the examples before, are toxic, right? Or just transactional. But how can we activate the deeper layers of the social field, right? I mean, that's really what all education is about, right? All education is about activating generative social fields. All learning and leadership is about that as well. How can we do that in specific contexts? This is, by the way, a picture from Sao Paulo here. So from a ULab team. Then, and the one thing that we learned is the only way to do this, right, at a massive scale is if you have a support structure. All movements in the world have had a support structure. Kind of that's the foundation, it's the backbone. It's something we call U School for Transformation, just as a working title, by which we mean an infrastructure that is democratizing access to transformation literacy. By integrating science, arts, consciousness, technology, and profound societal regeneration. So that's, I think, that's a critical ingredient that we need in this movement for regeneration, because we need to really, the transformation literacy is really a vertical literacy. It means kind of the quality, cultivating the quality to shift our consciousness from ego to eco, right? From seeing it, just kind of seeing situations just from my angle, to a seeing that's more embedded in the whole ecosystem, right? That kind of, that is embedded in generative dialogue, that is grounded in generative listening. And now saying that like I do now is really the easy part, right? Anyone can do that. But the real trick is to building these deep learning infrastructures that allow us to build these capacities, to activate these capacities. In a dormant way, they're already there, but they are not activated, not cultivated. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity that we have, because what I learned in my own life, 1989, boom, the Berlin Wall gone, right? The Cold War system that seemed to be built forever, gone. You could, in hindsight, you could see the cracks before, but when they happened, they were not quite apparent to most people, right? And I think we are in a similar moment there, here right now, where profound changes are afoot. Most people really feel that, but most people want to be part of a different story. But the how is mostly unanswered. And I think that's where our role as movement makers is, kind of to be more practical and more accessible in terms of the how. So that's my little contribution here, and I hope that's that's helpful, and we can have a little moment of conversation, and then you will of course continue to explore these topics from also from very different angle. And I think that's what this movement is all about, because there is no single center of this movement. The center is there where you are, right? Kind of where you activate your own agency.
Muito obrigado, Otto. Muito interessante, oportuno colocar o ser humano de volta no centro, e esse chamado que educação a função da educação hoje é ativar o campo social da cura, da regeneração. E isso talvez a gente faça trazendo o coração de volta, mas fundamentalmente por um letramento para a educação, transformation literacy. Acho que é muito oportuno esse conceito da educação para que as pessoas aprendam o ABC dessa transformação que nós precisamos enquanto sociedade no mundo. Muito grato pela sua apresentação. Nós vamos agora pedir às pessoas que se desloquem para as salas. Nós temos um grupo de salas para serem trabalhadas numa conversa muito rápida, uma conversa de 4 minutos. 8 minutos. Eu vou compartilhar com vocês só uma instrução bem rápida para vocês irem para as salas, né? As salas estão sendo formadas, vocês vão ter a possibilidade de conversar em grupos e, basicamente, qual é a pergunta que nós devemos fazer para construir essa educação que treine, que eduque, que coloque a sociedade na busca dessa construção para a cura de uma sociedade que está deixando sintomas muito claros de haver uma doença estabelecida, né? Então, quais são as perguntas poderosas que nós precisamos fazer para buscar esse processo de estabelecer na sociedade essa educação para a cura, para a regeneração daquilo que é a propriedade humana mais fundamental, dos valores humanos. Então, eu vou pedir... aqui vocês têm o código do Mentimeter, também esse código está colocado no chat. Então, eu vou pedir para a Elaine conduzir as pessoas para as salas, e vocês terão 8 minutos para conversa na sala, e voltamos para cá. Vocês podem colocar suas perguntas no Mentimeter, ou podem colocar suas perguntas também no chat, quando vocês voltarem para cá, ok? Então, Elaine, se você puder conduzir todo mundo para as salas, te agradeço.
Para que te mandem a um grupo por el mismo.
Olá a todos e todas. Agora vocês serão direcionados para as salas simultâneas. Caso precisem se retirar de lá por algum motivo, basta clicar no botão azul, sair da sala simultânea. Um pouco de cuidado para não clicar em sair da reunião. Caso alguém permaneça aqui por algum motivo, não se preocupem, nós os encaminharemos para salas, preferencialmente do seu idioma. Um abraço, até já.
Das perguntas. E vocês podem escrever no chat as perguntas que vocês fizeram para vocês mesmos. Vocês podem também continuar escrevendo lá no Mentimeter. Eu vou selecionar algumas poucas perguntas destas e apresentar ao nosso palestrante, o Otto, e essas perguntas serão todas coletadas. Todas as perguntas que vocês colocaram, todas as contribuições serão coletadas e depois estarão à disposição de todos vocês para trabalharem nas perguntas. Otto, eu tenho aqui algumas perguntas do Mentimeter, são poucas. Nós devemos... Primeira pergunta. Nós devemos falar ou explicar a teoria U para a nossa comunidade? Essa seria uma boa forma de começar? Outra pergunta, também teoria U. Como levar as ideias da cabeça para o coração? Eu tenho aqui mais umas perguntas. Deixa eu ver, cadê? Está no chat. Cadê a pergunta que eu tinha visto aqui? Uma pergunta que diz respeito também à questão do dinheiro. Quais são os diferentes significados do dinheiro nessa economia, nessa sociedade que nós estamos? O que mais? Eu tenho aqui... Eu acho que nós podemos começar com essas perguntas, Otto. Duas perguntas relativas à teoria U, como levar a teoria U, uma pergunta relativa a dinheiro, e estão chegando outras, eu vou fazer a escolha aqui.
Sure, happy to. So on the first question, I think the first two questions really go together in a way. So I would say it's often not a good idea to overshare the theory U up front or any other theory. So I think the point about the U theory is that you need to practice it, not preach it, right? So it's not about kind of, in a way, what I did. You give a long lecture, right? So, but in a real situation, I think if I am, so I gave a lecture because that's what I was invited to. But if you're in a real situation, say with a school or with a initiative, citizen initiative, or with any other organization, the way you would start is not by giving a lecture, right? The way you would start is by listening, right? Practice the listening, don't preach it. I think that, and yes, the theory can be very helpful, right? But in my experience, it is most fruitful if you supply the theory bite size in the moment when people have an experience that they need to make sense of. And then kind of theory is like the piece that illuminates that experience that you just had. So that's why very often in a practical way, we start with really building and honing and practicing the deeper levels of listening and the deeper levels of conversation. Because that's where you connect with situations, where you connect with change makers, where you connect with what's going on around you. And from there, and a concept I always found useful is the concept of the cracks. So if you want to change another person, right? So that's often a situation we find ourselves in. For you to be successful in your job, right? Be that as an NGO or the government or a business, for you to be successful in your job, you need to change the behavior of other people that don't report to you. So in other words, you can't just tell them what to do. You need to somehow convince them a different way, right? And if you want to change the behavior of another person, if you want to change the behavior of another person, then the biggest leverage you have is to be open to be changed yourself first. Because any kind of intervention goes nowhere if you don't have the relationship. How do you build the relationship? By being willing to be changed first. And that's what we call listening, right? Listening is really that process, right? Listening kind of is opening a place within yourself, right? Where you create a space for the other, right? To shape it. And so that's why I don't think like preaching theory is doing anyone any good. And so that's, you need to practice this stuff. And that's why theory U, it's almost like a misnomer, right? So it's like, yes, it is a framework on the one hand, but it is a set of principles and practices, right? Secondly. And then thirdly, it's really kind of a deeper, it's part of a larger movement, right? It's a deeper way of operating. Kind of presencing really means kind of connecting to a deeper level of our own capacities that's always there, but often not attended to. That's what you want to do, because if you do it, you activate this capacity in your environment. But giving a lecture is often not that direct road into that. It actually can lead you in a different direction. I hope that this is helpful. And sorry for me just talking about this.
Okay, Otto. I have two more questions. I think that both are together. Desculpa. Eu tenho mais duas questões, eu acho que ambas se conectam. A primeira é: qual é a verdadeira causa interior da nossa dificuldade de crer na sociedade como nós idealizamos, como nós sonhamos com a sociedade? Qual é a causa interior que nos dificulta a acreditar, a crer nessa sociedade? E a segunda pergunta: como podemos ajudar que a educação, nesse espaço que ela ocupa hoje, ela trate também a dimensão espiritual desse futuro que está emergindo? Como a educação pode abrir espaço para tratar a dimensão espiritual desse futuro que está emergindo? Acho que com essas duas perguntas a gente pode terminar o nosso bate-papo.
All right. Very good. So, I mean, just to give that second question kind of one more data point. I was just a few days ago talking to the head of the Department for Education at the OECD, kind of all the OECD countries, and they just, that's
Oops. Acho que parou. Otto, você nos ouve? Otto, do you hear us? Uh-oh. Parece que travou a conexão do Otto. Caiu, ele deve voltar.
Tá voltando já, professora. Já tá voltando.
Elaine, você depois coloca ele na tela também?
Sim, professor.
sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was a little glitch. So the, I mean, I was just giving a data point to the second part of the question, which is a conversation with the head of Department for Education at the OECD, where he shared kind of that they just got like the results of a new study that showed that the awareness for creative, that's how they called it, right, is way up, right? Everyone knows that kind of we have with STEM, we have been measuring the wrong things, kind of it needs to go into more towards human flourishing and creative capacities. So the awareness, and there's very high numbers of, yes, that's what we need to happen and so on, but the capacity of doing it is going down. So that's really, so that's why the second part of both of your questions, but also the second part is so important. I'm just underlining that. And I would say it has to do with what I referred to earlier with kind of this missing action confidence, right? That's something that when we created research, it's actually a term that came out of looking at the ULab results. So ULab is like basically an online learning environment that activated a global ecosystem of 200,000 people organizing in small groups and practicing some of these skills. And then there was a research project on what is it actually coming out of that. And action confidence was one of the most significant observations that people came up with. So I would say to your first question, what's getting into the way? What's getting into the way in my experience is doubt and fear. And a lack, so there is kind of, yes, I know that's what needed to happen, but there is a voice of doubt there. And there's also a lack of, and fear, right? So last week so I run a ULab class here at MIT. And so they all kind of develop really on what they want to do and kind of their project and so on. And then I asked them one question: what's holding you back, right? What is holding you back? So, okay, all of this is clear. All of this, that's what you really want to do. What is holding you back? And then from all these, so we did that online, even though it was in class with 60 people. And there was one word in the word cloud in the center, and everything else was small around. The word in the center was fear. That's what's holding everyone back, right? And so MIT students, including many from Latin America and Brazil, right? So those are very privileged people usually, right? So who end up here. Fear. That's what's holding us back. So I would say doubt and fear are two major ones. But there's maybe also, so implicit with the question you ask is, what is it we can do? And in my experience, it's like, well, you can't, a lecture about doubt and fear is not going to do me any good, right? So even though knowing that this is the voice of doubt, the voice of fear, that allows me to make a distinction, say, oh, it's not me. It's just kind of one voice that's part of my inner conversation. That already gives me some agency. But in my view, in my experience, kind of where the key leverage is, and that goes back to the heart at the end of the day, is social arts. Because what we are missing is not the knowledge. We are not missing, even the tools are often there, right? But it's the practice fields where we experience a different way of operating. Because, okay, I know it's fear, but am I going to now take the idea of courage and try that out with something crazy out there on the most important stage? No. Would I be willing in a practice field to engage in a new way if it's a safe environment kind of with people who also want to try out something new? Yes, I'm open to do that. That's where, for example, social presencing theater, I don't know whether some of you, that's a social art form we developed. It's geared towards building such a practice field, right? Where you access your embodied knowing, your deeper levels of knowing, and experience that right away in a context. I also, frankly, from my own experience, right, I know as an educator, what is it that goes against this fear and so on? You put people that operate from their real purpose, right? You put them in front of a class, right? And there is a magic that happens through that, right? There is a transmission happening. And you can even do that online. So there's also like a deeper human process. If I see a generative social field, I experience that, right? I only need to do that, experience that for 10 seconds, and I know it's possible. It's switching on something within me that's never going away. So even if the next experience is on the depressing side of things, right? So that's how I also experience that. So you see it once, right? And so it can be a person, it can be a social field, it can be a practice field, kind of where social arts comes in a way that allows you to experience some of your deeper capacities. And that's the environment where we begin to, so it's always embodied environments in some ways, because even if I experience another person kind of through my listening, kind of, I feel that in my own body, something is beginning to, it was there before, but I didn't have awareness of that. So that's where the leverage point is. And that's the interesting thing. So the last question to my students last week was, okay, so that fear, okay, we got that. What would be helping you to deal with it? Right? So what would be a supportive environment that would help you to navigate this, right? And the answers, many things, right? But the interesting thing about the answers was all of these things we can do for ourselves, right? It's not like big money or government or this or that, none of that. It's all things we can easily provide for ourselves if we organize in an intelligent way as a movement, as a grassroots. So we can easily provide that for ourselves. So that's why I have a lot of confidence going forward, because yes, the voice of fear, the voice of doubt, all these things, very powerful. But guess what? The moment we begin to see them as that, they're just voices. and begin to activate the resources that we have and that we can support each other with, right? In local and regional and cross-regional context, anything is possible. So I think really, from my point of view, the real superpower on this planet is not the US, obviously. It's not China. It's not any other state, but it is our capacity to realign attention and intention on the level of the collective, right? And that is, to do that, that is kind of, I would say, I don't know, the holy grail of democracy, right? I mean, that's the promise of democracy, maybe, right? Kind of to realign attention and intention on the level of the collective. And that's what you do when you do meditation, mindfulness as an individual, kind of that's what we do with social presence in theater and small groups and systems, right? Making a system sense and see itself is realigning attention and intention. And if we do that, right, on a societal level, right, that's what we call democracy, right? And that's where the moment we do that, we realize, well, money, the use of money in society can be much more aligned with our intention. We learned that through COVID, right? $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. Yes, we can do this, right? We can align the generation and use of money a lot more with our intention. And now we need to apply these learnings to the stuff that really matters, which is the challenges and opportunities now ahead of us. All right.
Well, very, very well. Very thanks, Otto. This conversation is too good to open our mind, open our heart either. And a lot of people is writing it in the chat. I will thank you very much for your time, for your presentation right now. And now to finish our event, I will ask Joan Botero to give us some final words, okay? Thank you, Otto. Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias, Wilson. Gracias, Otto. Gracias a todos. Hoy estamos justamente en nuestro cuarto día de este seminario online sobre democracia y su relación con distintos temas. Hemos comenzado la semana con la temática de la autonomía junto a Gerald Häfner. Luego nos metimos con los recursos naturales junto a Cícero Bley. Y ayer nos adentramos en el vínculo entre la democracia y la economía junto a Joan Melé. Hoy concluimos con la ponencia de Otto Scharmer profundizando el tema de la educación. Otto, muchas gracias por tu contribución de hoy. En lo personal me quedo con esta reflexión, el notar las necesidades, concientizarlas como un primer paso, esta mirada fenomenológica de la realidad con el corazón abierto, esta empatía que mencionabas, justamente como este primer paso que abre una transformación individual que luego puede escalar a lo social y ahí empezar a hablar de un cambio sistémico. Y me llevo a esta pregunta que colocabas al principio de cómo nos conectamos con nuestro propio futuro. Así que bueno, gracias nuevamente por la sesión de hoy. También quiero volver a agradecer a Michael por impulsar este encuentro, a Wilson por la excelente facilitación de hoy, a todo el equipo que está detrás de escena, está Andrea, Paulo, Claudia, las traductoras Elizabeth, Rebeca, y en especial hoy en día a Eliane Pineiro, quien nos está ayudando con el soporte técnico del evento. Detrás también está participando Gerald Häfner, que nos vino acompañando desde el lunes hasta el día de hoy, así que gracias Gerald por el compromiso y estar acá acompañando todo este proceso para llegar al panel de mañana. Y bueno, justamente mañana, a modo de conclusión de este seminario online, de toda esta semana, estamos organizando una propuesta muy especial. Es un panel de cierre que será facilitado por Janine Saponara y Wilson Nobre, quienes guiarán un diálogo entre los expositores de la semana, trayendo las preguntas e inquietudes que ustedes mismos fueron trayendo durante toda esta semana en el chat. Para este cierre nos daremos más tiempo del que nos estamos dando durante las sesiones de lunes a jueves. Tendremos 1 hora y media, así que bueno, para que realmente el diálogo pueda tener sustancia y sea profundo. Ahora sí, para concluir, quisiera una vez más compartir con ustedes una frase de Rudolf Steiner sobre la educación, esta vez, que para mí se vincula con el desafío que mencionaba Otto, hoy cuando decía que la cualidad de la intervención depende de la cualidad del interventor, ¿no? La cualidad de lo interno es indivisible de la cualidad social externa. La frase es bien corta pero profunda y dice así: solo puede transmitirse al niño aquello que el adulto conquistó en sí mismo. Muchas gracias y hasta mañana.
Cícero.